What is the most influential advice you've ever been told? Influential in the sense that it impacts the way you think, the way you act on a consistent basis. That question has intrigued me for a long time. I want you all to think about one more component of that question, is why has that piece of advice stuck with you? Why does it still impact the way you live your life today? When I think about it for myself, all of the lessons, all of the advice that has had an impact on me has one thing in common. And as a young person, we're inundated with people who want to tell us how to do things. They want to give us advice on how to live our lives. And for a long time, none of it made sense. But when it finally did, that one thing they had in common was that they all started with questions, not the answers. They were all opportunities for me to figure it out for myself. Next slide. When I was 21 years old, I had dinner in that very chair, in that very restaurant, for New Year's in Charleston, South Carolina. I sat with my family, I sat with some family friends, and we had a conversation about happiness. And I could say that they had a conversation about happiness, and I kind of sat in the corner, reserved, because I didn't think I had anything of value to contribute. I was 21, I was getting ready to graduate from college, and I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And I mean it, zero. There was a man at that table named Steve Robbins. He was an executive coach. And he looked at me and he said, "Andrew," he said, "what are you passionate about?" And I said, "Sports, photography." And he said, "No." He said, "That's what you like to do." He said, "What do you love about sports and photography?" And I said, "Well, sports. I get to be athletic, stay in shape. I get to play with my friends. Photography, I get to be creative. I get to see the world in a different way than everyone else." And he said, again, "What are you passionate about?" And I said, "Those things." He said, "It's not what you want to do. It's the reasons that you love them. Those are your passions." And he said, "What are you going to do after you graduate that's going to enable you to engage those passions?" And I said, "I have no idea." And he laughed, and he said, "Isn't that awesome?" And I said, "No, it's not." And he said, "Isn't it awesome that you can figure it out at 21 and not 31? And he was right. What he enabled me to do with that one question was to say that my personal happiness was directly linked to linking that passion with my profession. And he showed me that it was okay to not have an answer, but that I had to continue to answer those questions until I had one. And so when I went back to school, I had this new set of tools to say, this is what I care about, this is what I'm passionate about. I need to find a job that's going to enable me to do these things that I love. And graduation got closer and closer and closer, and I didn't do it. I was terrified. Was I going to take a job that I didn't care about, that wasn't going to let me do these things that I was learning about myself? Or was I going to take a time out and stop? And I did. I called my father, who was moving to Alaska, and I said, "Dad, when are you leaving?" He said, "August 1st. I said, "How are you getting there?" He said, "Plane." I said, "What if we drove it?" He said, "Are you serious?" And I said, "Yeah, I need to figure some things out." 2 months later, we ended up here. This is the Tunnel of Trees Road in Michigan. And I was having a conversation with my dad about his 27 years in the military. And I pulled a Stever, and I said, "Dad, are you happy about the time you spent in the military?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because I was proud of my time there and what I accomplished." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I felt like I was a part of something greater than myself, and I had an opportunity to lead good men." And I said, "Wow, that was profound." And he looked at me and he said, "What's the last thing you've done that you're proud of?" And I said, "Well, I scored 20 points in a basketball game. I had a great Photoshop." But they were inconsistent. There was too much space in between them. And I had to go back a little bit. I went back 3 years to when I interned for an organization called Dreams for Kids in Chicago. And I remember going to Chicago and working in shelters on the south side and taking out 30 stained, soiled mattresses and replacing them with sparkling white, brand new ones. And I remember the families and how grateful they were. I remember planning an adaptive athletic water skiing clinic for 60 children with disabilities and seeing those kids get on water skis for the first times and those smiles and having a parent walk up to me and say, Brandon has 3 brothers. They always play sports and Brandon watches. Today, they all got to cheer him on. Thank you. And I knew what it was like to have pride, to feel that my efforts were going towards something that I cared about. And I redefined pride. What it was for me was this overwhelming sense of self-worth. And I knew at that moment that whatever I could feel proud of, whatever I was doing and striving for, if I could say that I was proud of it, it was going to give me that confidence that I felt at Dreams, that didn't depend on anyone that I was around on, that only depended on me because it was as personal as possible. I was proud. When I got back from Alaska, I got a corporate job and I knew that I needed to help kids. So I started taking my spare time to work in the shelters in Southeast. After a while, it wasn't enough. I walked out of work one day and I met with a close friend of mine who had recently got laid off. And she said to me, I'm bored. I said, why? And she said, I don't know what to do with my time. And I said, well, what aren't you doing that you want to be doing? And she said, I want to be writing. I want to be painting. And I said, do that. And she said, yeah, you're right. And I said, no, do that. And she said, yeah. And I knew that nothing was going to happen. But the wheels were turning in my head. I said, what are all the things that I want to be doing that I'm not? I went home and I literally wrote them down. I became aware of all the things in my life that I wasn't doing that I needed to be. What it led me to see was that I wanted to continue helping people. I didn't want to keep sending resumes out. What I wanted to do was to start my own thing. What I wanted to do was to start Dreams for Kids. So there I sat. I knew I wanted to start this organization for all the right reasons. 1 year ago, I had no idea what I was doing in my life. I sat there and I said, I am absolutely baffled by this entire concept. And then I look back to a time in my past when I felt that. One of my favorite things to do in college was to climb up on my roof with my best friends, Tyler and Alex. And one of the last times I spent on that roof was a year before graduation, when they had just locked up jobs they cared about, and I had nothing that I was looking forward to, and I was scared, and they knew it. And Tyler looked at me and he said, what's the matter? And I said, I'm worried. I don't know what's next. And he said, worrying about it is not going to change it. And it made sense, but it didn't put me at ease until he said, what's one thing you could be doing to fix it? What's one thing? And I took that away from this and I applied it every single day. What he enabled me to see is that the question is not where we are. The question was, where did I want to be? And once you can identify the one thing that you can do that you think is working you towards that goal, that's all there is. That's all that matters. So there I stood. I had that knowledge. I went back. I said, I have Dreams for Kids. What's the one thing I can do? I called Tom Toohey, our president and founder, and I said, Tom, I want to start the DC chapter. And he said, we're behind you. And I said, what's the next thing I can do? I said, I need to start this thing. I Googled how to start a nonprofit. I got my certificate of authority in the mail 3 months later. I had started a nonprofit. I said, what's next? I said, I need to get some interns. I put a posting up on Craigslist. We had interns. And I kept asking, what's next? What's next? What's next? How could I have ever known that it would lead to this stage or to where we stand today with Dreams for Kids? As Haley mentioned, working with some of the most prominent organizations in the city, like the Washington Capitals and Nationals, working with the government and special advisors to the President of the United States, getting ready to throw one of the largest holiday celebrations for homeless youth in all of DC. The one thing I realized after all these events is that the answers that we often seek to guide us as we're figuring out who we are and what we like and what we want to do, but they don't always come in the form of answers. That oftentimes they will come in the form of questions. And what we need to ask ourselves is, are you going to be open to hear that question? Will you be willing to answer that for yourself? And will you be bold? Will you take the first step, even though you might not know where to start? And I go back, and I would ask you, if we were to take you back to the restaurant and ask any of you, what are you passionate about? What would your answer be? Would you be able to tell me what you do for fun or why you love it? If I were to take you into the tunnel of trees and I was to ask you, what's the last thing you've done that you're proud of? What would you say? If I were to ask you at the fountain in DuPont Circle, what aren't you doing that you want to be? What would be on your list? And then if we were to end, if I was to take you up on the roof and to ask you, what is the one thing you can think of? The one thing that you can think of that you can be doing to work you towards wherever it is that you want to be. What is it that you can do that is going to get you from here to there? That's all that matters. Thank you, guys.